Why did everyone stop, talking the moment he pointed at her chest? The maintenance bay had been loud just seconds earlier, tools clinking, boots echoing, nervous chatter rising as the inspection team walked in. But when Director Edmund Hayes leaned forward, narrowing his polished eyes on a single piece of faded cloth stitched above her pocket, silence filled the room. That patch, the one she never explained, the one she wore not out of pride, but because taking it off felt like erasing lives no one would ever remember. "Is that regulation?" Hayes asked, his voice cutting the air like a blade. Reese Palmer stood straighter, her back against the weight of every staring eye in the bay. Her crew, the young mechanic with grease under his fingernails who still believed in fair inspections, the nervous recruit who wanted to cry but didn't dare. Even her oldest technician, Jake Morris, was pale, watching as if this argument might decide more than a uniform code. Reese kept her tone calm. "Yes, sir, it meets the standards." But Hayes wasn't asking about standards. He was hunting. The kind of man who didn't understand work until it gleamed on a spreadsheet, who measured worth in polished corners and perfect compliance. He stepped closer, his suit immaculate against her worn uniform. His finger jabbed toward the patch like an accusation. "And what exactly is this supposed to represent?" She breathed once, steady, the way she'd been taught years ago. "Never let them see what's behind your eyes. It's a military decoration, sir." Hayes smirked, repeating her words like a joke. "A decoration? From what unit? I've reviewed most insignia and I don't recognize this." The weight in the room shifted. Crew members exchanged glances. They knew Reese was a veteran, but no one really knew the details. She had never told them, never wanted to. "The patch represents service in a specialized unit," she said, keeping her voice level. Hayes's smirk sharpened. "Specialized unit? How conveniently vague. Are you trying to tell me a maintenance supervisor is wearing some kind of elite military insignia?" Her heart didn't race, not the way it used to under fire, but something inside tightened, the way it always did when memories pressed against walls she had built to survive. She could still see the faces, still feel the water pressing in from all sides, still hear the crackle of comms in her ear and the silence that followed when voices were cut off forever. Her answer came quiet, almost softer than she intended. "I earned it." The laugh Hayes gave had no warmth, no belief. "And I suppose you expect us to believe this faded scrap of fabric represents some heroic service. I've seen your file, Palmer, your maintenance staff, not special operations." The crew shifted uncomfortably. One of them clenched a fist but didn't move. Another looked like he might step forward but froze instead. Their respect for her was caught in a net of authority they couldn't defy. Reese stood still. She had learned long ago that silence carried weight, that sometimes the loudest answer was the one not given. But Hayes pushed harder, his voice rising. "This patch, outdated, unauthorized, probably picked up at a surplus store, has no place on a proper uniform. And your whole facility shows the same disregard. Equipment scattered, workspaces untidy, standards ignored. You think your service gives you a license to—" He didn't finish, because another voice cut through the bay, one carrying command that couldn't be faked. "What exactly is going on here?" Bootsteps echoed on concrete as a figure filled the doorway. Dress blues, gold insignia, chest rows of ribbons that spoke of years lived in places most people only knew through blurred news headlines. "Commander Knox Mills." The air shifted instantly. Every sailor in the room straightened without thinking. Even Hayes, who had walked in with smug authority, faltered a fraction under that gaze. Mills scanned the bay quickly. His eyes landed on Reese, and for the briefest second something changed in his expression. Not recognition exactly, but something close. Surprise, maybe. Respect, maybe. "Commander Knox Mills," he said, offering Hayes a hand with professional ease. "Here for the quarterly SEAL training evaluation. I was looking for the facility supervisor to coordinate equipment requirements. Hayes gestured almost dismissively. This is Miss Palmer, facility supervisor. We were just discussing some uniform irregularities. Mills turned fully toward Reese, and then he saw it. The patch. His gaze froze on the faded emblem stitched above her pocket. His voice softened, but in the way of someone seeing something sacred. Palmer, may I ask where you acquired that patch? Reese's throat felt tight. The moment she had avoided for years had arrived without warning. I earned it during service, sir. Mills stepped closer. His eyes never left the cloth, and when he spoke again, his words landed like a hammer on silence. Director Hayes, I don't think you understand what you're looking at. The maintenance bay seemed to stop breathing. The crew, Hayes, even Reese herself. Because the truth was heavier than anyone there could imagine. The patch Hayes had mocked represented one of the most classified missions in naval history. A mission that had never appeared in records. A mission that had buried names without graves. A mission Reese had carried in silence for 15 years. And now, standing in front of her crew, she felt the weight of that past pressing against the present. Her mind pulled her back unbidden to the beginning. Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. Humid air sticking to her skin. 22 years old, a sailor with nothing to prove but everything to earn. The voice of Senior Chief Amanda Stone rang in her memory. Sharp, unyielding, the kind of voice that could break or build a person with a single sentence. You think you're ready for fleet assignment, Palmer? Reese remembered standing straight, answering with a voice that was stronger than she felt. Yes, Senior Chief. Stone had walked slow circles around her, boots clicking, a predator studying prey. Your scores say more than basic fleet work. You've fixed problems that stumped sailors with 10 years in. You've outlasted everyone in physical tests. You're steady, precise, adaptable. Reese had said nothing, just kept her eyes forward, heart thundering. Stone stopped in front of her. What do you know about naval special warfare support operations? The words had stunned her. She'd heard whispers, shadow units, technical specialists who worked in silence who never existed on paper. She knew nothing more. Very little, Senior Chief. Stone's eyes narrowed. They're looking for people like you, not the strongest, not the fastest, the ones who think under pressure, the ones who adapt when everything falls apart. It's voluntary. It will break most who try, but if you succeed, you'll discover what you're truly capable of. That was how it began. The heat, the endless tests, the feeling of being surrounded by men carved from stone, all doubting the young woman who dared stand among them. The weeks of training designed to crush willpower, not just muscle. The moments where failure meant more than exhaustion, it meant someone else might not make it home. And through it all, she had found something inside herself, something she didn't know was there. Not strength, not speed, but the refusal to quit, the ability to look at impossible problems and say, there must be a way. And that, more than anything, was why she still wore the patch. Because it wasn't about her. It was about the ones who hadn't made it back, the names never spoken, the stories never told, the moments that lived only in shadows until today. Now, in the maintenance bay with Hayes watching her like a challenge and Commander Mills recognizing the truth in silence, Reese knew something she hadn't wanted to face. The past doesn't stay buried forever. Sometimes it rises. Sometimes it speaks. And sometimes it's stitched into your chest where no one can ignore it. How do you prove yourself when everyone in the room is waiting for you to fail? That was the question Reese Palmer carried as she stood shoulder to shoulder with men twice her size on the cracked concrete of Naval Special Warfare Base. The humidity clung to her like another uniform. Sweat poured into her eyes before the first whistle even blew. The instructors didn't see individuals, they saw obstacles to be broken. And for weeks, that's exactly what they tried to do. Day one nearly destroyed her, ocean sprints until her legs buckled, sand so deep it swallowed every step, lungs burning, arms trembling, body screaming to stop. She wasn't the fastest, not the strongest, not even close, and she could feel the eyes on her, the unspoken judgment that she didn't belong here. But when others dropped, when the whistle cut through dawn air and another name was called out for quitting, Reese stayed. Not because it was easier for her, but because quitting had never been an option. "You're smaller than them," one instructor barked. "Not as strong, so why are you still standing?" She didn't answer, she just kept standing. By the end of the first week, the class had lost a quarter of its candidates. By the second, another half. Big men, college athletes, sailors with years of fleet experience, all gone. Reese endured, quietly, methodically. Every blister on her hands became a reminder. Pain was temporary, but quitting would last forever. At night, she lay in her bunk staring at the ceiling, body throbbing. Her thoughts drifted to the life she could have had. A regular Navy career, a safe posting, a paycheck and nothing more, but something deeper pressed at her. A question planted by Senior Chief Stone: "What are you really capable of?" She didn't know, but she was determined to find out. It wasn't the physical training that defined her. It was the moments of impossible tasks. One night, after hours in freezing surf, she was ordered to repair a radio unit in total darkness. Her hands shook from cold, teeth chattering, but she forced herself to remember every circuit, every wire, every fragile connection. Minutes stretched like hours. She got it working. Another time, underwater navigation nearly broke her. The ocean pressed against her chest, stealing every breath. She had to calculate bearings, monitor oxygen, and push through currents that wanted to drag her off course. Panic clawed at her lungs, but she steadied herself. Counted beats, trusted her training. She surfaced exactly on target. Every success was met with silence. No applause, no congratulations, just another test waiting. That silence hurt more than she admitted. Sometimes, lying awake, she wondered if anyone saw her, if anyone believed she belonged. And yet, when she looked in the mirror, she saw changes. Muscles sharper, eyes harder, movements more precise. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was adapting. By week 4, an instructor pulled her aside. Mike Turner, a coach with 8 years in the program, a man who had seen more candidates fail than succeed. "You're different, Palmer," he said, not unkindly. "Not the strongest, but you think your way through problems. Rope climb this morning, you used legs and momentum instead of arms. Smarter, not harder. That's what keeps people alive." Alive, the word echoed. This wasn't about medals or recognition. It was about survival, hers, and the people she would one day be tasked to protect. Medical training came next. Dr. Sandra Bell, precise and uncompromising, taught them things Reese had never imagined. How to stop bleeding with what you had on hand. How to keep someone breathing when the airway was collapsing. How to make decisions when failure meant death in minutes. Reese's steady hand surprised even herself. Where others panicked, she focused. She sutured wounds under strobe lights meant to disorient. She stabilized a casualty while explosions echoed through the training compound. And she realized she had found something that mattered more than passing a course. She could keep someone alive long enough to see home again. But the hardest test wasn't medical or physical, it was mental. By week 8, they introduced weapons systems and equipment she had never dreamed existed. Gear that looked like science fiction but was deadly real. Radios that worked through hundreds of feet of seawater. Rifles engineered for salt and sand. Computers tougher than steel, capable of running missions that didn't officially exist. Chief Anderson, a man with eyes like stone, watched her pick up a rifle designed for maritime operations. She held it steady, adjusting instinctively. It felt like more than a weapon. It felt like responsibility. "This gear exists," Anderson said, "because missions exist where failure is not an option. Every time you hold it, remember that." She did, she never forgot. By the 10th week, only 12 remained from the 47 who had started. 12 faces worn down by exhaustion, eyes hollowed by lack of sleep, bodies scarred by training. And yet, they stood together. Master Chief Brock Reed appeared then, a figure whispered about in shadows. Rumors said he had led missions that saved thousands without a single headline. His presence filled the room like gravity. "You 12 think you're special," he said, voice gravel and iron. "But the truth is, selection only shows you can survive the minimum. The real test begins now. Maritime Guardian training. You will serve alongside teams that officially don't exist in places never marked on a map. You'll carry equipment the world can't know about. And if you succeed, you'll wear the patch that means one thing: you carried the weight of silence and didn't break." Reese felt something shift inside. Not fear, not even pride, something heavier. A sense that every step forward meant leaving behind the person she once was. That night she couldn't sleep. She lay awake, muscles aching, staring into darkness. She thought about her family back home who didn't know where she was, about the classmates who had quit, whose names had already been forgotten. And she asked herself quietly, why am I still here? The answer came not in words, but in a memory. Senior Chief Stone's challenge. The idea that she was meant for more than a safe path. "I wanted to matter," she whispered into the night, though no one heard her. And deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. Because the patch wasn't earned in training. It was earned in silence, in shadows, in missions where names vanished and records were buried. And one day soon, she would face the first of those missions. But for now, all she could do was keep moving forward through pain, through fear, through doubt. Because once you've chosen the path, there's no turning back. What happens when the people you're meant to support don't trust you yet? That question burned in Reese Palmer's chest as she stepped into the classified training facility for the first time. The building's windows were black, its walls unmarked. Inside, security checkpoints hummed like something out of science fiction. This was Navy she had known before. This was a world hidden beneath the surface, and she had just been allowed inside. Master Chief Reed led the 12 survivors of selection through a maze of corridors. Every space looked designed for one purpose: to strip away illusions. Smoke-filled compartments forced them to repair systems without oxygen. Flooded chambers simulated sinking ships where panic drowned faster than lungs. Desert modules baked them until sweat became salt in their eyes. "Maritime Guardian operations exist at the edge of everything you know," Reed explained. His voice never rose, but it carried like stone dropped in water. "You will train with technology most sailors will never see. You will serve teams whose names never appear on rosters. And you will do so knowing failure leaves no second chance." Reese listened, silent, taking in every word. She had learned silence could be armor. Here it became survival. The equipment stunned her. A communications unit that could transmit encrypted signals through 600 feet of seawater. A tactical computer hardened against electromagnetic pulses. Gear designed to keep working after being dropped, drowned, frozen, or burned. Technology built for people who had no margin for error. "This," Chief Anderson said, holding up a device no larger than a book, "can keep a team alive when satellites go dark and radios fail. Learn it, trust it, but never forget it's only as good as the hands that keep it running." Reese cradled the device, understanding the weight. It wasn't just wires and circuits. It was the difference between a team making it home or never being found. Then came the operators. Lieutenant Commander Jack Harrison walked in with a presence that silenced even the instructors. Not by force, not by rank, but by the quiet authority of someone who had earned every ounce of respect. His team followed close behind: Murphy, compact and watchful, eyes sharp as knives. Cooper, steady, the kind of man who could dismantle a bomb with hands that never shook. Mitchell, young but confident, a voice man in a world of silence. "These are the people you'll support," Harrison said simply. Their lives depend on your ability to keep their systems working when everything else breaks. The operator's eyes scanned the candidates, not hostile, not welcoming either, evaluating, measuring, as if deciding whether the newcomers were assets or liabilities. Reese felt their doubt like weight on her skin. She knew what they saw, a woman smaller than most, quieter than all. Someone who didn't look like she belonged in their world of fire and steel. But she stayed steady, because steady was the only weapon she had. The first joint exercise nearly broke her. They boarded a rocking platform at sea, tasked with repairing a sabotaged comms system in 3 minutes or less. Waves slammed the deck. Salt burned her eyes. The clock ticked faster and faster. Murphy barked, 2 minutes or we abort. Her hands shook from cold, but her mind locked in. She pulled components apart, built bypass circuits from scraps, and prayed her improvisation would hold. 30 seconds left. The radio hissed alive. Clear signal, clear voice. Harrison's nod was small, but it meant everything. Outstanding. For the first time, she saw the operator's doubt soften. Not vanish. Not yet, but soften. Training only grew harder. Repairs underwater while currents ripped her sideways. Diagnostics inside smoke-filled compartments with alarms shrieking like chaos. Medical procedures under strobe lights while simulated gunfire roared inches from her ears. And each time Reese found a way through. Not perfect, not pretty, but through. Late one night, Harrison sat across from her in the mess, coffee steaming in his hand. He studied her the way he studied maps, with patience, with precision. "Why'd you volunteer for this, Palmer? You had the scores to go anywhere. Safe postings, good career. Why this?" Reese hesitated, then told the truth. "I wanted to matter, not just serve time, not just do a job. I wanted to stand where it counted, even if no one ever knew." Harrison didn't smile, he just nodded. "That's the only right answer." By week 4 of advanced training, she began to notice something in herself. Confidence, yes, but not the loud kind. A quiet steadiness. The ability to move through pressure like water, to carry weight without complaint. She wasn't one of them, not yet. But she was becoming something just as vital, the one who made sure they came home. Then came the secure vault. Chief Anderson unlocked the heavy door, leading them into a room filled with systems that hummed with secrets. Computers hardened against sabotage. Encryption rigs capable of running in combat zones. Portable life support units designed for conditions no one admitted existed. And at the center, a patch. It sat in a glass case, embroidered in muted tones, a symbol simple yet heavy. Anderson's voice lowered. "This is the Maritime Guardian insignia. Less than 200 people in the world have earned it. You'll wear it only if you survive the field evaluation." Reese stared at the emblem. It didn't glitter. It wasn't polished. But it radiated something weightier than medals or ribbons. It whispered of silence, of sacrifice, of lives lived in shadows. She didn't reach for it, she only looked, and she thought someday. The final phase arrived without fanfare. "You've proven you can function under pressure," Master Chief Reed told them. "Now we find out if you can do it when people are shooting at you. Each of you will deploy with an operational team. Real mission, real stakes. Success determines whether you earn the patch." Reese's name was called, assigned to Harrison's team, Operation Deep Water. That night, she lay in her bunk staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the facility. She thought about the path that had led here, from a young sailor at Camp Lejeune to this room where tomorrow's orders meant stepping into shadows that might never release her. Her heart didn't race, it didn't tremble, it just beat steady. Because she knew. The test wasn't coming. It was already here. What does it feel like to carry other people's lives in your backpack? Reese Palmer thought about that as she sat inside the belly of the USS Steadfast, her knees nearly touching the opposite wall of her cramped quarters. The submarine cut silently through the Persian Gulf, carrying a team whose names would never be written in any report. Around her, pipes groaned, air recycled, lights hummed, the ocean pressed from all sides. In her pack were systems worth more than most homes. A communications rig hardened against salt, jamming, and EMP. A medical kit designed to keep someone alive when no hospital existed for hundreds of miles. And a computer capable of controlling every piece of gear the team carried. She had memorized each switch, each fault line, each possible failure. Because if any of them failed, her teammates might not come home. Lieutenant Commander Harrison found her bent over the comms rig, running diagnostics for the third time in as many hours. His voice was even, not unkind. "How do the systems look?" "All primary functions nominal," she answered, eyes still on the readings. "3 potential failure points identified. I've prepped contingency workarounds." Harrison nodded. "That's what keeps people alive, not perfection, anticipation." The words landed heavier than he knew. Reese had always been the one who prepared for the storm no one else saw coming. That instinct had carried her this far, but she knew this storm would be different. Around her, the operators checked gear with practiced silence. Murphy, compact and sharp-eyed, laid out rebreathers built for underwater stealth. Cooper disassembled and reassembled explosives like a man tying shoelaces. Mitchell fine-tuned encryption protocols, his fingers dancing across keys. They moved like men who had done this 100 times. Reese felt their eyes on her, not dismissive anymore, but not fully trusting either. She was the newcomer, the unproven, and in the shadows they lived in, unproven could mean dead weight. She told herself she didn't need their trust yet, only their time. The first test came sooner than anyone wanted. On the third night, deep in international waters, the submarine's comms system buckled. Screens went dark. Circuits hissed with interference that shouldn't have been possible. The link to command was dissolving. The problem wasn't in any manual. It was chaos in the circuitry, electromagnetic bleed from a source no one could identify. Reese dove in. 6 hours hunched over the system, tracing faults, bypassing corroded connections, stitching together signal paths out of spare parts and instinct. The submarine groaned. Officers whispered about fallback procedures, and she worked jaw clenched, refusing to let failure take root. At last the system blinked alive, clear, secure, contact restored. When she stumbled into the mess hall after, exhausted and shaking, Harrison slid her a cup of coffee so bitter it tasted like metal. "Outstanding work," he said simply. "That improvisation, that's why you're here." She didn't smile, but inside something settled, a seed of belonging. The next day, Murphy cornered her by the diving bay. "You ever worked underwater for real?" he asked, holding out gear that looked more alien than human. "Training pools," she admitted, "not the ocean." Murphy gave a thin smile. "The ocean doesn't care about training manuals. Currents, temperature shifts, Merc, it changes everything." He tossed her a mask. "We'll find out tomorrow." And they did. The Gulf water was warmer than she expected, but thick with sand and silt that cut visibility to a blur. Weighted by gear, she descended to 60 feet, lungs burning against the rebreather. In her hands, a relay node that had to be installed with absolute precision. The current pulled her sideways. Her gloves fumbled on wires that should have been easy. She forced herself to stop fighting and instead adapt, bracing against rocks, using touch instead of sight. One connection, then another. Piece by piece, the relay came alive. When she surfaced, gasping in the dark, the rig functioned perfectly. Murphy's nod was small but real. Not bad. She slept that night with salt still in her hair, her body aching, but for the first time she felt she might be carving a place among them. Captain Elizabeth Reed, commanding officer of the Steadfast, stopped her in the passageway 2 nights later. A woman of calm authority, she looked Reese over with eyes that missed nothing. "This your first deployment?" "Yes, ma'am." "How does it feel different from training?" Reese hesitated, then answered honestly. Training felt like disappointing instructors if you failed. Here, failure means people don't come home. Reed studied her a moment, then nodded. Hold on to that, too many forget. The words stayed with her. Because she knew it was true, the stakes here weren't theoretical. Every system she touched, every cable she connected, could decide whether these men lived or died. The submarine surfaced in darkness 50 miles off the Iranian coast. No running lights, no noise beyond the sea itself. In the cramped briefing room, Harrison laid out the updated intelligence. Satellite images glowed against the wall. A facility inland. Guard towers added since the last recon. Patrol boats circling the shoreline. Electronic defenses strong enough to blind an ordinary team. What looked like a soft target isn't soft anymore, Harrison said. But the mission stands. Neutralize key systems. Extract with proof. Palmer, he turned to her, you're our lifeline. Without comms, we're stranded. She felt every eye turn to her. The weight in her chest wasn't fear, it was responsibility. Yes, sir, she said simply. Pre-dawn, inflatable boat cutting across the water like a ghost. Engines silent, only the hiss of waves against rubber. Reese crouched low, cradling her sealed pack. Navigation screen glowing faintly in her hands. 2 miles from shore they would dive, carrying everything with them. The facility loomed inland. Guard towers, searchlights, electronic sweeps that pulsed like a heartbeat across the horizon. Harrison's voice cut through the throat mics. Everything we've trained for comes down to this. No mistakes, no second chances. Reese checked her seals one final time. The comms rig, the medical kit, the relays, everything she was, everything she could be. And then into the water. The gulf closed around her, warm but heavy. She descended with the team, vision clouded, currents shifting. Her mind whispered panic, but her training spoke louder. Adapt, adapt, adapt. 40 minutes of silent swimming. Relay nodes hidden in rock outcroppings, her fingers working blind, each click of a connection a promise. Her lungs burned. Her muscles screamed. She pressed forward. When they surfaced in the shallows, the beach looked deserted, but she knew better. Invisible systems scanned the night. Patrols moved in patterns unseen. She activated her scanner. Frequencies lit up the screen like a storm. Approach window opens in 90 seconds, she whispered into her mic. Then closed for another 5 minutes. Move on my mark. The operators obeyed without hesitation. For the first time, Reese wasn't just following them. She was leading them. 2 miles inland, through rolling hills that whispered of ambush. Her equipment mapped surveillance gaps, timed guard rotations, predicted sweeps. Every decision she made pulled them closer to the target and deeper into danger. And then she saw it, a signal she hadn't expected, stronger, smarter, a net spread wider than their intelligence had ever suggested. Her heart tightened. She whispered the words no one wanted to hear. Sir, the facility's more active than we were told. I'm reading triple the personnel. Hardened defenses. This isn't what we trained for. The silence that followed felt endless. Then Harrison's voice, low but steady. The threat's still real. We adapt. We continue. Reese swallowed hard. She adjusted frequencies, rerouted power, kept their comms alive even as the enemy probed back. Every pulse of her scanner showed danger tightening like a fist. The mission was already spiraling beyond expectation, and they hadn't even crossed the perimeter. She kept moving, because there was no turning back. Not now, not ever. What do you do when the plan dissolves before your boots even cross the line? Reese Palmer felt that question claw at her as she crouched in the brush overlooking the enemy facility. Her scanner pulsed with warnings. Frequencies tangled, signals overlapping in unpredictable patterns. What should have been a clean infiltration corridor looked like a storm. She whispered into her throat mic, voice calm though her chest ached. Jamming sweeps every 3 minutes. motion sensors at the east perimeter, unknown patrols inside the compound. We'll need to move when the sweep dips, windows less than 30 seconds. Harrison absorbed the information with a small nod. Copy, we go on your call. It struck her again. These hardened operators, men who had survived years of combat, were waiting on her word. Trust wasn't given easily, but in this moment their silence told her they were depending on her. She forced her breath steady, timed the pulses, counted beats. Now. They moved like shadows. Across open dirt, under the dull sweep of searchlights, through grass slick with dew. Reese's pack weighed heavy on her shoulders, the comms rig, her lifeline, their tether to survival. At the chain-link fence, Murphy's cutters sliced silently. They slipped inside, past guard towers, past the humming transformers that smelled of ozone. Her scanner flared again. Hold, two-man patrol north corner, wait for cross. The patrol passed, footsteps crunching gravel. The team flowed behind them, ghosts on the wind. But the closer they got, the more Reese's unease grew. The air wasn't just filled with night. It was thick with signals, currents of invisible interference pressing against her like weight. Someone was running serious electronic countermeasures, stronger than their intel had prepared them for. And then static. Her rig flared, signal disrupted, screen shuddering. She scrambled, fingers racing, rerouting power, trying to keep their encrypted channel alive. Harrison's voice crackled through, distorted but clear enough. Problem. Active jamming field, she whispered, sweat beading her forehead. Source unknown, they're hunting us. Can you hold it? She didn't answer right away. Her hands were already pulling wires, building a bypass from scraps, fighting the invisible storm. Circuits sparked. Heat burned her fingers, but at last the signal steadied. For now. Harrison didn't ask for reassurance. He just gave the order, move. The facility loomed ahead, squat buildings reinforced with steel, guard towers stitched with wire. No markings, no flags, just the quiet menace of a place that wasn't meant to exist. Murphy and Cooper led the breach, a silent takedown at the door, a whisper of suppressed fire, and then they were inside. The air smelled of oil and dust. Lights flickered dim red. Rows of equipment lined the hall, blinking with life. Servers, consoles, racks of electronics humming with secrets. Reese's heart tightened. She'd seen training modules. This was different, real, tangible. Somewhere inside these walls lay the proof command wanted, evidence of a weapons program hidden in the desert. She dropped to her knees, pulling out her portable system, patching into the network. Fingers danced across keys. Encryption walls rose like cliffs, layer after layer of code designed to lock her out. You've got 4 minutes, Harrison warned, eyes on the hall. She nodded, blocked the pressure, focused. One wall down, another breached. Sweat dripped into her eyes, her hands moved faster than her thoughts. 3 minutes, too. And then she was in. Files streamed across her screen. Images, data, schematics, proof. She pulled everything, copied faster than the system could resist. But the alarm sounded anyway. A shriek of metal, a blare of sirens, lights flashing red. They know we're here, Mitchell snapped. Reese's stomach dropped. They had minutes, maybe less. Boots thundered outside, shouts in a language she barely understood. Weapons clattered. The facility was awake. Time to move, Harrison barked. They fell back into formation. Reese slammed her system into its pack, clutching it to her chest as if it were oxygen itself. Because it was. Without it, the mission was nothing. The first shots tore through the hall. Suppressed fire answered. Murphy dropped 2 figures before they cleared the door. Cooper's explosive charges lit the side corridor, collapsing it behind them. Smoke and dust filled the air. Reese coughed, lungs burning, but her legs kept moving. Every step was survival. At the exit, searchlights scissored across the compound. Sirens wailed. Gunfire cracked sharp against steel. Her rig sputtered again, jamming field intensifying. She dropped to her knees in the dirt, heart pounding, fingers tearing into wires. "Palmer," Murphy shouted, "we don't have time." "I can hold it," she snapped, sharper than she meant. But she didn't stop, couldn't stop. Because without comms they were blind. Without comms the extraction wouldn't come. Her hands moved faster, pain forgotten. She rerouted through backup relays, built a signal chain out of nothing but instinct. The rig hissed a live, green light blinking. "Signal restored," she gasped. "Move," Harrison ordered. They sprinted for the fence, bullets tearing dirt at their heels. Reese felt every step like fire in her lungs. Her legs wanted to buckle. Her mind screamed for rest, but she kept going. At the shoreline, their boat waited, hidden beneath camouflage. Cooper triggered a charge, smoke covering their retreat. They hit the water, cold, dark, heavy. Reese swam harder than she ever had in her life, pack pressed against her chest, lungs screaming. Bullets hissed into the sea around them, muffled thuds in water. She pushed deeper, stroke steady, refusing to let go. When they surfaced, the submarine's beacon pulsed in the distance. Safety, home. And yet not all of them surfaced. "Mitchell." His absence cut like a blade, one voice missing from the comms, one shadow gone from the water. Reese's chest burned, grief clawing at her even as she swam, but there was no time to mourn. Only the mission, only survival. Hours later, back aboard the Steadfast, drenched and trembling, she sat against the bulkhead, clutching the soaked pack that held the mission's proof. The team was silent. No cheers, no celebration, just the heavy air of men who had left one of their own behind. Harrison broke the silence. His voice was steady, but his eyes weren't. "You did your job, Palmer. Without you, none of us would have made it back." She wanted to believe him, but her mind replayed Mitchell's absence like a loop. His laugh in training, his focus on encryption, his shadow in the water that never returned. She whispered the truth, voice cracking, "But I couldn't bring everyone back." Harrison's hand settled on her shoulder, brief, grounding. "None of us ever can." The weight of it sank into her bones. This was the cost, not medals, not recognition, but silence, loss, names that disappeared into the ocean. And in that silence, she understood why the patch mattered. It wasn't about victory. It was about bearing the weight of those who never returned. And she knew, deep inside, that this was only the beginning. Because shadows like these never lifted, they only grew darker. What happens after the mission ends, when the silence is louder than the gunfire ever was? Reese Palmer sat in the dim debriefing room aboard the Steadfast, the hum of the submarine a low reminder of the world pressing in from all sides. Across the table, Lieutenant Commander Harrison kept his face composed, but the lines around his eyes told the truth. Master Chief Reed's voice carried steady as stone as he went over the details. Success. Data recovered. Enemy infrastructure compromised. Mission parameters fulfilled. On paper, it was a victory. But there was an empty chair in the room, and no report could fill that space. Mitchell's name wasn't spoken. It wouldn't appear in records. His family would never know the truth. A folded flag, maybe. A scripted explanation, nothing more. Reese stared at her hands. They were still raw from salt and wire, still trembling from the weight of hours spent holding life and death between her fingers. She heard Reed's voice as if from underwater. Commendations, efficiency, mission-critical performance. Words that meant nothing against the silence where Mitchell's laugh used to be. Harrison caught her eye once, and that was enough. He didn't say it aloud, but she could read the truth there. This is the cost. After the debrief, she found herself alone in the narrow bunkroom. The submarine swayed gently. The air tasted of recycled metal and salt. She pulled the patch from her pocket, fingers tracing its faded edges. It wasn't hers yet, not officially. But she knew now why those who carried it wore it like a wound. Because it wasn't about pride. It was about memory, about carrying the weight no one else saw. Sleep didn't come. When it did, it wasn't rest. dreams of dark water, of bullets muffled into silence, of Mitchell reaching for the surface and never breaking through. The missions didn't stop. Weeks later, they deployed again. A cargo ship flagged under a false name, carrying crates no one admitted existed. Reese spent 14 hours straight rerouting power through a failing generator while Cooper rigged charges on the ship's hull. They escaped seconds before the vessel erupted in flames that lit the horizon like dawn. Months after, they inserted through desert canyons, dust choking lungs, electronics fried by heat. Reese built a new relay from nothing but copper wire and intuition, saving their extraction when the desert swallowed satellites whole. Every mission blurred into the next, different seas, different sands, different shadows, but the same silence after, the same names that faded, the same weight pressing deeper into her chest. And always the operators looked at her differently now, not as an outsider, not as someone trying to prove herself, but as one of them. Murphy, gruff as ever, handed her a protein bar after one grueling op. "Don't take this the wrong way," he muttered, eyes averted. "But you're the only reason I've still got a pulse. Don't stop." Cooper, usually all business, quietly asked her advice on reconfiguring field explosives when heat warped his usual method. "You think different," he said. "That's what keeps us alive." Even Harrison, who rarely wasted words, began to trust her with details he shared with no one else. Late nights, maps spread between them, he'd ask, "What do you see here? What are we missing?" Her voice mattered, her presence mattered, but the cost never lessened. On one mission, a helicopter extraction fell under fire. The bird tilted, blades screaming. Reese braced against the fuselage, clutching her rig, systems sparking as bullets chewed through steel. She rerouted circuits midair, keeping communications alive long enough to vector in support. The team survived, but the pilot didn't. Another name gone to silence. She learned not to ask too many questions, not about why they were there, not about what bigger chessboard their mission served. Orders came, missions executed, silence followed. That was the rhythm, that was the life. But sometimes, when the team slept and the night pressed too heavy, she'd let herself wonder, how many more? How many before the weight breaks me too? One evening after a mission in the Horn of Africa, Harrison found her alone by the shore, staring out at waves black as oil. "You did good," he said quietly. She shook her head. "We lost Jenkins." Harrison didn't deny it, didn't soften it. "Yeah, we did." "Then how is that good?" she asked, voice sharper than she intended. He let the question hang, then answered in a tone that carried both grief and certainty. "Because we brought 6 others home who wouldn't have made it without you. That doesn't erase the loss. Nothing ever does, but it matters." She didn't reply. The ocean swallowed the silence between them, but something in her chest shifted, not lighter, never lighter, but steadier. She began to understand. The patch wasn't a symbol of victory. It was a ledger of losses carried forward. Months blurred into years, missions stacked like stones on her shoulders, some successes celebrated only in silence, some failures buried without a trace. And through it all, Reese carried on, not because she wanted glory, not because she believed in the politics behind every order, but because in the smallest spaces, a stabilized airway, a repaired circuit, a rerouted signal, she made survival possible. And survival was all that mattered. Still the ghosts followed. Mitchell, Jenkins, the pilot whose name she never learned, shadows that walked beside her in silence. Some nights she dreamed of taking the patch off, leaving it folded in a drawer, walking away. But she knew she couldn't, because the patch wasn't about her. It was about them, the ones who never came back. And as long as she wore it, their silence had a witness. What do you do when you realize survival might mean leaving a piece of yourself behind forever? Reese Palmer asked herself that as she lay belly down in a shallow ravine, sand grinding against her teeth, the horizon bleeding with fire. Behind her, the desert facility they'd breached hours earlier still burned. Ahead, nothing but black dunes stretching into infinity, and somewhere in between, the enemy, hunting, waiting. Operation Harrow. The name meant nothing on paper. It didn't even exist in official files. But to those who lived it and those who didn't make it home, it was everything. The mission had started simple, too simple. A raid on an arms depot camouflaged as an agricultural hub. Intelligence had assured them the compound was guarded by light personnel. A fast in and out, retrieve samples, plant charges, leave. But intelligence had been wrong. The depot wasn't guarded by dozens. It was fortified by hundreds. Networks of bunkers, trenches, layers of electronic defenses woven so tight Reese's scanners nearly shorted trying to map them. From the first step past the perimeter, she had known something was off. The silence was too heavy, the air too still. And then the floodlights, the shouts, the gunfire splitting the night. They were surrounded before they even understood what they'd walked into. Harrison's voice snapped across comms, calm but edged with steel. "Break east." Palmer cut their eyes. Her rig hummed in her pack as she rerouted power, scrambling the enemy's infrared systems, collapsing grids in seconds. Towers went blind. Alarms faltered. It bought them minutes, no more. Minutes were enough to fight. Cooper's explosives shattered the first barricade. Murphy dropped 3 targets before they even knew where the shots came from. Reese moved with them, never firing, never leading, but carrying life on her back. Every frequency, every link, every chance to keep them tethered to survival. The ground shook with detonations. Sand sprayed into her face. And through it all she worked, fingers raw on wires, breath ragged, heart hammering steady because panic was a luxury no one here could afford. Hours bled together. By the time they breached the main depot, dawn was threatening the horizon. Inside, rows of crates, chemicals, weapons-grade material labeled as fertilizer, proof enough to confirm the program, proof that would never make it to headlines. But then the ambush. Gunfire erupted from catwalks. Grenades clattered into shadows. Murphy went down hard, his legs shredded. Reese was on him instantly, hands pressing against blood that pumped too fast. Her kit opened in seconds. Gauze, pressure, clamp. "Stay with me," she whispered, voice steady though her insides were breaking. "Stay with me." Murphy's grip crushed her wrist, eyes blazing with pain but alive. Alive because she refused to let go. "Move," Harrison roared. They carried Murphy, Reese's hands never leaving his wound, her shoulders screaming under his weight. Every step was agony, every breath a countdown. And still the enemy came, shadows out of smoke, bullets whining past, a grenade detonating so close her ears rang with nothing but silence for minutes. When they reached the extraction point, the nightmare wasn't over. The helicopter waiting for them never arrived. Command was silent. Her rig hissed static, then nothing at all. "They're jamming everything," she gasped, slamming her fist against the unit. "Can you break it?" Harrison demanded. Her hands tore into circuits, desperate. Wires sparked. Heat scorched her palms. She rerouted through emergency bands, punching through walls of interference. Sweat blinded her, but she saw it, a sliver of clean signal. "Signal clear," she shouted, "but not for long." Harrison didn't hesitate. "Transmit." She sent everything, schematics, samples, data, through that fragile window. Proof of the program, proof worth dying for. And the window closed. The enemy pressed harder. Dozens now, maybe hundreds. They had minutes left. Harrison made the call no one wanted. "Split. Palmer, Cooper, take Murphy east. I'll draw fire west." "No," Reese snapped, chest heaving. "We stay together." Harrison's eyes locked on hers, calm, certain. "You keep them alive, that's your mission." And then he was gone, disappearing into smoke, fire echoing in his wake. Reese dragged Murphy with Cooper, every step through sand that wanted to swallow them whole. Gunfire behind. shouts closer. Her pack a weight that bent her spine but never broke her. Hours blurred, day bled into night. Water gone, feet blistered, but they kept moving because stopping meant death. Murphy clung to consciousness, whispering curses, then prayers, then silence. Reese worked every break they had, changing dressings, giving what little fluid she could spare, whispering promises she didn't know if she could keep. Cooper grew quieter with every mile. His usual steady presence sharpened into grim resolve. At last, when Reese faltered under the weight of Murphy's body, Cooper hoisted him with a grunt. "You keep us alive. I'll carry the rest." She wanted to argue, but she didn't. She kept her eyes on the horizon, her scanner clutched like a compass and pushed forward. 3 days, 3 nights. No extraction, no contact, just sand, heat, silence. By the time they stumbled onto the coast, Murphy was barely alive. Cooper was hollow-eyed, stumbling. Reese's body felt carved from stone and pain. A fishing boat appeared like a mirage. Civilian, unmarked. A risk they couldn't question. Cooper's last ounce of strength loaded Murphy aboard. Reese followed, collapsing against the wooden planks, her rig clutched to her chest even as her vision blurred. They lived barely. Harrison never returned. Back at base, the mission was classified above top secret. Files sealed, reports burned. Mitchell, Jenkins, now Harrison, names gone into silence, never to be spoken again. But Reese carried the patch. It was placed in her hands by Master Chief Reed weeks later, his voice quiet, his eyes unflinching. "You've earned this the hard way, Palmer. Not in training, not in theory, in fire, in blood, in silence. Don't ever forget what it stands for." She didn't, she never would. Every thread in that patch carried the faces of those she couldn't save. Mitchell, Jenkins, Harrison, shadows stitched into her chest where no one else could see. And that was why, years later, standing in the maintenance bay while Hayes mocked her uniform, she refused to take it off. Because the patch wasn't hers alone. It belonged to the ones who never came home. Why does silence sometimes cut deeper than words? Reese Palmer stood in the maintenance bay, eyes steady, her crew watching every flicker of movement. Director Hayes still loomed in front of her, lips curled in disdain, but his confidence had fractured. Because Commander Knox Mills wasn't looking at Hayes. He was looking at her patch. And in that moment, Reese felt the weight of years pressing back through her. The missions, the silence, the names she carried, Mitchell, Jenkins, Harrison, shadows etched into her chest with every stitch of cloth. Mills stepped closer, not hurried, not hesitant, his gaze locked on the faded emblem. "Where did you serve?" Reese's throat tightened. The words lived there but didn't want to come out, because to speak them was to break the silence that had protected her for so long. But she also knew hiding wasn't the same as honoring. "Operation Harrow," she said quietly. The bay seemed to freeze. Hayes frowned, confusion painted across his face. "That's not in any record." Mills silenced him with a glance, just a glance, the kind that reminded everyone in the room who had seen war and who had not. His eyes returned to Reese, softer now. "I lost a friend on Harrow," he said. The breath caught in her chest. "Harrison." She didn't say the name. She didn't need to. It was in the silence between them, understood without words. Mills straightened, his voice carrying with calm authority. "Director Hayes, you mock something you don't understand. That patch outranks every piece of brass in this building, because it isn't given. It's carried. It's earned in silence, and it costs more than you'll ever know." The words rippled through the bay. Her crew, who had stood in uneasy silence moments before, looked at her differently now. Not as the supervisor who fixed their systems, not as the quiet leader who never raised her voice, but as someone who had walked through fire and come back with scars no one could see. Hayes flushed, his arrogance cracked. He opened his mouth to argue, but Mills cut him off. "You came here to critique order and cleanliness. Fine, do that. But don't ever mistake a symbol of sacrifice for a scrap of cloth. Not in my presence. Hayes faltered. He turned, muttered something about standards, and stormed out. The silence he left behind felt heavier but different, respectful. Reese's crew shifted, uncertain, their eyes full of questions they wouldn't ask. Not now, maybe not ever, because some truths lived better in silence. Mills lingered. He stepped closer, his voice lowering so only she could hear. "You've carried it alone for a long time, haven't you?" Reese swallowed. Her answer came quiet. "It wasn't mine to carry alone, but someone had to." Mills nodded. His hand touched the brim of his cap in a gesture less formal than respectful. "Then carry it proudly, not for yourself, for them." And with that he was gone. Reese stood still, the patch warm against her chest. She felt the eyes of her crew on her, but she didn't look back. She didn't need their words. She didn't need to explain. Because the truth was simple. The patch wasn't about her. It was about Mitchell, who never surfaced. Jenkins, who fell in silence. Harrison, who vanished into fire so others could live. It was about every name that never reached a headline, every face that never saw home again. As the bay slowly returned to its rhythm, tools clinking, machines humming, voices rising, Reese let herself breathe. Not lighter, never lighter, but steadier. Later, alone in her office, she sat with the patch beneath her fingers. She thought about the years that had led here, about the girl who once stood at Camp Lejeune, hungry to prove she mattered, about the woman now, scarred by silence, tempered by loss, but still standing. Her reflection stared back from the dark window, tired eyes, steady hands, shoulders that had carried more than their share. She wondered if Harrison would recognize her now, if Mitchell would laugh at how serious she'd become, if Jenkins would remind her that survival wasn't the same as living. The ghosts never answered, they never would. But she understood something deeper. Dignity doesn't always shout. It doesn't demand medals or applause. It doesn't seek headlines. Sometimes dignity is just the weight carried quietly on your chest, day after day, for those who can't carry it anymore. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.